Hello and welcome to sewing tutorial number 3 from a very snowy Oxfordshire. This week we're going to be looking at cutting patterns. So we're going to take you through from what you can expect to find on the pattern to how to lay your pattern out on the fabric to the finer details of cutting your garment pieces out. I just want to give you a little heads up for next week. We're actually going to be looking at sewing machines next week. Now, if you're following this course, you've probably already got one up in the loft or in your guest bedroom, or you know someone who has one that maybe you can borrow it from. A lot of sewing machine shops also offer the opportunity for you to rent machines by the day, the week and the month. We have one in town. So just to let you know, just give you that extra time to prepare, you need to be able to get yours out, get it on a good clean surface, ready for next week's session, dust it down, make friends with it. We're going to be looking at threading sewing machines and the basics of using them next week, so you're going to need to have yours ready. I just thought I'd give you an extra week's warning so that you've got some time to get your hands on one. Alright, let's get started on this week's tutorial. Last week we looked at your pattern leaflets and this week we're going to start looking at the patterns themselves. So just a little recap, I explained that we had these outlines on the pattern leaflets that you saw last week. And I was going to be working on dress A for the purpose of these tutorials. So the pieces we were going to use, the pieces we were going to use for dress A were piece 1, piece 2, piece 3 and piece 4. Now your pieces for each of your patterns are found on this carbon paper. This will come in your packet with the packet instructions that we looked at last week. So now we're going to unfold these bad boys and have a look at what you can expect to see. Now there can be a number of different sheets in with your pattern leaflets, so don't be daunted by them. They are huge, as you can see. They don't fit on my table, so I've just unfolded this one to my first pattern piece, which is pattern piece number 1. As I said last week, your pattern pieces on here match up to the ones on your sewing leaflets that we looked at. Okay, so if you have a look closely on here, you'll see there are several lines around the outside of the pattern piece. These refer to the various different sizes that the garment's available to make in. So here we've got sizes half, so 6 months to 4 years old. I personally always cut the biggest piece because that way, if you cut the smallest piece, obviously you're losing the bigger sizes. So that way as your child grows, there are ways of just folding it over so that you can reduce it down to the size that you require. So what I'm going to do now, before we go any further, just to make this a little bit easier, is I'm going to cut out all of the pieces I need and then I'm going to come back and we're going to have a look at them in more detail. So I'm going to cut out piece 1, 2, which is somewhere else in this massive sheet, 3 and 4, and all of the others we're going to ignore for now because if you don't need them, don't worry about them. So before I cut these 2 pieces out, I just wanted to give you another heads up about something that you might notice. These pieces are the same piece for the same part of a garment, both number 3s, but there are 2 separate ones depending on the sizes. So this one is for 6 months, 2 years and 4 years, and this one here is for 1 year and 3 years. So just bear that in mind when you're cutting out the numbers. Do check that the numbers on the outside of the pattern pieces, so this bit here, corresponds to the age that you're creating the garment in. And here they are, my pattern pieces all cut out and ready to go. One thing I didn't mention when I was talking about cutting out the pattern pieces earlier was that to do this you need to use your non-fabric cutting scissors, because if you use them to cut these patterns there is a tendency for them to blunt and you need your fabric scissors to be really, really sharp. So I've got 2 pairs, one that I use for cutting out the patterns and another that I use for cutting out the material. It's really important that you keep these 2 pairs of scissors separate. So let's have a look at the pieces. The first thing you need to do is identify what each of the pieces, what part of the garment each of the pieces refers to. So we've got number 1 here. It will tell you on the pattern this is the front of the dress. We've got this one over here, which is number 2, and this says it is the back of the dress. And we've got these 2 pieces as well, so we've got 3 and 4, and as we know from the listings in the pattern leaflet, these are the facings for the inside of the dress. The next thing you'll need to look at is where you need to lay your pattern pieces out on your material. So as we saw in the pattern leaflet before, there is recommended layout guide in the pattern leaflet. But what you need to look for on your garment pieces are things like this arrow and line here. So this identifies a centre fold in your garment. So what you can see here is the front of the garment should be placed on a centre fold, which means that when you open it out you have one piece. That's not true for the back of the garment. The back of the garment doesn't have one of those arrows on the side, so that means that this is done in two separate pieces. The same here for the interfacing and facing parts. This one's not cut on a centre on a fold, whereas this one is. I've chosen a really narrow corduroy for my dress in navy. And what I've done here is I've already folded the material in half, selvage to selvage. So if you can just see, that's the selvage, that's the unfinished, the edge of your piece, and that's on the other side. So if you fold them together, then you'll end up with the two selvages together and a fold down the middle of the fabric on the other side. Now I'm going to start laying out my pattern as is dictated in my instructions. So if you look here, this is dress A, so this is the one I'm looking at, and we're going to do the material first, followed by the interfacing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my pattern pieces. We're going to start with piece number 1. Now this is the piece, if you remember, that has a centre fold on it. I'm going to lay the piece on my material. So where the arrows point to the centre fold, I'm going to lay it along the fold in the material. Move that one down a little bit. Now if your fabric is slightly, not quite a straight line at the end, do make sure that the pattern comes through on both sides so that you don't end up with one shorter than the other, which is a mistake I have made before. I'm going to put that one there. And we're going to lay this pattern piece on here. Something else I want you to notice when you're looking at your patterns is this arrow down the middle. This arrow represents the grain line of the fabric. So like I said, this will run in parallel to your selvage usually. So I need to place this line in parallel, which is why it's facing this way on the fabric. And the same on my smaller pieces. So piece number 4 here, the line runs from left to right as I'm looking at it. So I need to place it in that direction on my material. Your next step is to pin your pieces to your material, so that's what we're going to do now. For the purposes of this video, I've just turned the material around a little bit. And I'm only cutting out pieces 1 and 2. I'm actually going to use another material for my facing. There's nothing to say you can't do this as long as the material's around the same thickness as the main fabric that you're using. Something else I wanted to talk about before we cut out the outline of these two pieces. You'll notice that I've cut around the larger size, as I mentioned earlier. So in this case, size 4. I've pinned the whole thing to the material. Now purists look away now because this might not be, strictly speaking, the best way to do things. Remember, I'm a mum who taught myself to dressmake, so these are some of the techniques that I use, and they may not necessarily be industry techniques. In order to mark on my material the correct size, the size I'm going to be using, what I do is, using a pin, I go along the correct line. So this here is my size 3 line, which is the line I'm using for my garment. I go along with a pin and push the pin through in various places on the line. So always at the beginning and the end of the line, and in the middle and on any curves. So I go all the way down. You'll notice here that actually you can see it, probably little white marks where I've done it. Let me show you on this one as well. There we go. So I've just gone around with that pin and made tiny little pinpricks. And then I use this, which is a dressmaker's pencil. You can use tailor's chalk as well. And I just colour quite hard over the holes that I've made in the pattern. So that if you look very carefully, I'm not sure where you'll be able to see it. Let's have a look here. Can you see there? So the dressmaker's pencil has actually come through the little hole that I made with the pin, and you can just about see it on the other side. Then it's literally a case of cutting out your garment in the bigger size and then taking the pattern piece off and joining the dots, and then you trim the edge to the size that you need. It's slightly wasteful when it comes to material, but I just find it's easier than folding things over, because things like these little areas up here, these tiny little bits where it just makes the tiniest difference what size they are, they're really difficult to fold over. So by using this method and joining the dots on the pattern, I just find that my life is made a little bit simpler. Something I wanted to point out before I cut piece 2 out is that on piece 2 there seem to be 2 cutting lines. So there's a cutting line right up here and there's a cutting line down the bottom. This is because some of the pattern pieces are used for multiple garments. So on my pattern leaflet you can make a top as well, which is what this cutting line refers to. So it would require piece number 2, and here it says cutting line for views B and C. So they're garments B and C. So I don't cut there. Remember, I'm doing garment A, so that's right down the bottom. So that's cutting line for view A. Something important to bear in mind as well when it comes to cutting out your pieces. So there you have it, your first pattern pieces cut for your garment. Next week, as I mentioned at the start of the video, we're going to be looking at how to use the sewing machine, and we're going to start putting some of those garment pieces together. The remainder of the sessions are going to take the form of 15-minute tutorials, and they're going to look at some of the common things that you'll find in your sewing instructions, because I'm quite conscious that you're not sewing along the same pattern as me. So I'm going to use my pattern to explain to you how to do some of the things such as trimming seam allowances and understitching and basting your pieces. That way you'll be able to hopefully follow your own pattern but pick up some of the skills that you use along the way. Please let me know how you're doing, let me know how you're getting on, let me know what garments you're making, and maybe one day we'll be able to share in a gallery all of the garments we've created as a result of these tutorials, which would be really fantastic. We've got a product launch, actually, just to get that little bit of advertising in that, on the 14th of February. Our newest product to be added to the range is coming out, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Otherwise, have a lovely half term, a great Valentine's Day, and I'll see you in a week's time.